The real story of Abraham Lincoln, the human being, is far more astonishing. A tapestry woven with threads of unbelievable physical prowess, profound melancholy that bordered on madness, political maneuvering so shrewd it shocked his own cabinet, and a secret invention that should have changed maritime travel. Forget Honest Abe for a moment. This is the story of the man who, on the brink of losing his mind and his country, found the strength to forge a new America. The unconquerable Titan of the frontier, before the presidency. The tale begins not in the refined halls of government, but in the merciless mud and forests of the American frontier. When you look at the pictures of the solemn, bearded Lincoln, you see a man burdened by thought. You do not see a local wrestling champion who defeated over 300 men in frontier brawls, a feat that would later earn him a spot in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Young Lincoln, standing 6'4", a towering height for the 1800s, was not just tall, he was an imposing force of nature. His youth in Kentucky and Indiana was a brutal master. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died from milk sickness when he was just 9. A chilling detail. The cause was trematol poisoning, absorbed from cows that ate the toxic white snake root plant. This early, sudden loss marked him with a profound and recurring sorrow that contemporaries would later call hypochondria, but what we now recognize as severe clinical depression, or as Lincoln himself termed it, the hypo. This crippling melancholy was a permanent companion, often threatening to derail his life, yet somehow he harnessed its intensity into his work. Formal education was non-existent, less than 18 months total, but his mind was a furnace of self-teaching. He devoured the few books available, the Bible, Aesop's Fables, and the Life of Washington. When he settled in New Salem, Illinois, he was a flatboatman and a store clerk, but already showing the traits of an extraordinary intellect. Then came the true astonishment. Lincoln, the only U.S. president to ever hold a patent. During his flatboat travels, he constantly saw cargo boats stuck on sandbars in the shallow rivers. The problem plagued American commerce. Instead of simply complaining, Lincoln, with his frontier ingenuity, invented a system of inflatable bellows and levers attached to the sides of a boat. When the vessel ran aground, the bellows could be inflated, essentially lifting the boat over the shallow obstacle. The patent, number 6496, granted on May 22, 1849, was a tangible testament to a mind that saw practical solutions in the most abstract places. It was the mind of an inventor, not just a politician, and this practical, problem-solving genius would become the bedrock of his presidential leadership. The Prairie Lawyer and the Rise of Melancholy. After his brief stint in the U.S. House of Representatives, 1847 to 1849, where he opposed the Mexican-American War, Lincoln returned to Illinois and reinvented himself as the most respected prairie lawyer. He rode the circuit, traveling thousands of miles across the state to argue cases in local courthouses. It was here that Honest Abe was truly forged, not just by his integrity, but by his incredible storytelling, sharp wit, and his absolute refusal to take a case he believed to be unjust. His marriage to Mary Todd in 1842 was a tempestuous union of two passionate, brilliant, and deeply troubled souls. Mary, from a prominent Kentucky family, possessed a political ambition that matched his own, but the couple was constantly shadowed by tragedy. Of their 4 sons, only Robert Todd Lincoln would survive to adulthood. The death of their beloved son Willie in the White House in 1862 was a blow from which Mary, and arguably Lincoln, never fully recovered. It exacerbated Lincoln's depression, leading him and Mary to reportedly host séances in the White House in a desperate attempt to communicate with their lost son. The raw, human grief hiding beneath the veneer of the president was a secret, constant battle. Lincoln's political fire was reignited by the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which threatened to expand slavery into new territories. His famous Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, though he lost the Senate election, catapulted him onto the national stage. His arguments were so penetrating, his moral clarity so undeniable, that he became the face of the burgeoning Republican Party's stand against slavery's expansion. The weight of command, a cabinet of rivals. His 1860 election was a political miracle, won with less than 30% of the popular vote in a four-way race. But the miracle quickly turned into an apocalyptic nightmare. Before his inauguration on March 4, 1861, 7 states had seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. The Union was dissolving. Lincoln's first great act of leadership was one of stunning political genius. He filled his cabinet with his fiercest rivals. His Secretary of State was William H. Seward, who expected to be president. His Treasury Secretary was Simon Chase, who actively maneuvered against Lincoln throughout his first term. His Attorney General was Edward Bates, a political elder who looked down on the backwoods president. This team of rivals, as it became known, was a masterstroke. Lincoln knew he lacked the administrative and global policy experience of these men. By bringing them in, he gained access to their collective genius, their political networks, and crucially, he was able to control them. They initially viewed him as a naive upstart, but they quickly realized they had underestimated a leader with an unparalleled clarity of purpose and a titanium will. He would let them argue, debate, and vent, but when the time came for a decision, Lincoln made it, alone and with final authority. He was the most humble dictator America has ever known. The astonishing commander-in-chief, learning war on the job. Lincoln had virtually no military experience, yet he became a supremely effective commander-in-chief. His generals, particularly the early commanders like George McClellan, were often arrogant, slow, and contemptuous of the president. McClellan in particular was notorious for his disrespect, even referring to Lincoln as the original guerrilla, and sometimes refusing to see him at all. Lincoln's response was not to fire them immediately, but to engage in a policy of radical patience. He would read every military strategy book he could find, absorbing the principles of war. He spent hours at the War Department telegraph office, often alone in the middle of the night, sifting through raw battlefield reports. He learned warfare faster and more effectively than many of his West Point-educated generals. He realized the war was not about taking cities or capturing flags. It was about the fundamental objective of the Union, destroying the Confederate Army's ability to fight. The ultimate shock was his decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. This was not a purely moral act, but a brilliant piece of strategic warfare. Military necessity. It declared that all slaves in the rebellious states were thenceforward and forever free. This immediately stripped the Confederacy of a massive labor force essential to their war effort. Union Army boost. It authorized the enrollment of black men into the Union Army, adding nearly 200,000 African American soldiers by the war's end, who fought with unmatched fervor for their own freedom.
Moral high ground. It transformed the war from a mere political conflict over Union preservation into a transcendent moral crusade against slavery, preventing Great Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy. The timing was crucial. He waited for a Union victory, the Battle of Antietam, before announcing it, ensuring it was seen as a measure of strength, not desperation. This was the work of a political genius who could align the highest moral principle with the most brutal military necessity. The shadow of Fort Stevens, Lincoln under fire. The war was a constant source of stress, but one event is often forgotten: Lincoln's personal exposure to combat. In July 1864, the Confederate General Jubal Early launched a daring raid, advancing to the very gates of Washington, D.C. At Fort Stevens, a defensive outpost on the city's perimeter, the fighting came close enough for the president to personally visit the front lines. Standing a head taller than almost everyone around him, observing the skirmish, Lincoln suddenly became the tallest, clearest target on the parapet. An officer, allegedly a young Captain Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., later a Supreme Court justice, recognized the president and, fearing for his life, shouted, "Get down, you fool!" or words to that effect. Lincoln, the sitting president, was forced to duck under fire. He remains the last U.S. president ever to be shot at by an enemy combatant while in office, a truly astonishing, rarely discussed moment that cemented his commitment to the war. The second inaugural and the new birth of freedom. As the war drew to a close, Lincoln's true moral and intellectual depth was revealed in his second inaugural address on March 4, 1865. The speech, barely 700 words long, is perhaps the most profound piece of oratory in American history. It offered no victory boast, no condemnation of the South, but a haunting, almost theological reflection on the sin of slavery and the shared responsibility for the war. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's